Hey, welcome to this new lecture. This is the most important lecture you have had so far in this course. So please try to make the most of it. And this is actually a new video that I'm adding to the course. I didn't have this lecture a few times ago, so I added this quite a while after I published the course. And until now, I had explained this concept, so the errors, little by little in other lectures, but I felt that was not enough. And I was seeing that students were still having difficulties in understanding and dealing with errors in Python. So I decided to make a dedicated lecture for errors in Python. So here we are. And I said this is the most important lecture because, we learn about functions and strings and numbers until now in the previous videos. And these are individual concepts that, you'll learn now or later. You'll learn functions and strings and etc. But if you don't know how to read an error, how to understand an error and deal with it, if you don't know that, you will have troubles dealing with every other object like functions and strings and numbers, etc. So understanding an error and knowing how to deal with it, how to fix it, is very important. And even the most experienced programmers, they make errors in their programs. The difference is that they know how to read these errors, how to understand them and fix them. But everyone makes errors. So if an error shows in your program, don't panic. Just follow the instructions that I'll give you in this video on how to fix the error. So that's what this lecture is about. So what is an error anyway? An error in a program is a bug that causes the program to function incorrectly. Now, in Python, we have basically two types of errors. We have syntax errors and we have exceptions. Let's first focus on syntax errors and let's forget about exceptions. We'll go to exceptions after we explain syntax errors. I have this code here, and actually, this is a Python file. This is the icon showing on a Mac. So currently I am on a Mac computer. But that doesn't make the slightest difference. No matter where you are, Linux, Windows or Mac, everything is the same. So, I have a terminal here and let me go ahead and execute this program. This has a few errors, so let me show them. On Mac you can call Python 3 with the Python 3 command. On Windows you can just call Python or whatever command you are using. You can also use any editor that you like. And so, errors.py is the name I gave to the script. Execute. So, this is now an example of a syntax error. And this is the entire body of the error message. And this is very important. So, whenever you get an error, the first advice I give you is don't panic. Just focus on the error, read it line by line, just like you're reading a poem or whatever. So, the first line of the error points you to the name of the file that has the error. In this case, is errors.py. Then you have a comma, and after the comma you have the line where the error occurred. So it's line 3. And you can see here that line 3 is this one here. But you also have, for your convenience, Python prints out the line in the terminal. So int 9, here is where the error is. And just after that, you have the type of the error. So it's a syntax error. You also have other types of errors, such as name error, type error, but those are exceptions. And I'll explain later why we call them exceptions. So this is one type of error, a syntax error, and the others are exceptions. So this is a type, and then you have a description after the colon. Sometimes the description is more specific, more detailed. This time is just invalid syntax. So you have to figure out where you did some error, where you missed some syntax of your program. And you also have this arrow here pointing upwards. The arrow points you either at the token that the error is occurring or at the end of the token. So a token is, this is the token in this case 9. So it can be a number, it can be a string, anything. So at this point, this is pointing at the token, but it could also be like that. 999. Save the script. Execute. In this case, you see that it's pointing you at the end of the token. So around here you have an error now. And I know that int is actually a function. And functions in Python, they need to have brackets. So you need to pass 999 inside brackets, like that. And delete that. Save. And execute again. Alright. You've got another error, but don't panic again. This is my advice always. Instead of read the error, it says file errors.py, the file, line 5. Oh, line 5 this time. So it's not line 3 anymore, which means that line 3 was fixed. So what Python is doing is it's going through all the lines one by one from top to bottom. It checks the first line, it says, oh, it's fine. No error there, goes to the next line. No error, goes to the third line, no error this time. Fourth line is also fine. And fifth line has an error. So again, it's a syntax error. And this one is more specifically described. So missing parentheses in call to print. Note that you'll get this error only if you are on Python 3. If you are on Python 2, this won't be an error because in Python 2, print was a statement and was not a function. So with statements like return or print in Python 2, you didn't have to pass brackets. This syntax would be correct. So again, this arrow here is pointing you at the token. So we just add brackets there. Ctrl S to save the script and execute again. This time we don't get any error, so the script executed fine and printed out the output here. 1, 2, 3. So we had 3 print functions printing out output. This doesn't return any output because we're not printing anything. So this just gets the function input and produces some output, but that doesn't print anything. If you want to print it, you want to pass the print statement function there. There could also be other types of syntax errors, and such as you want to define a list 1, 2, and 3, but instead of closing it with a square bracket, you use a round bracket instead, like that. Save the script and execute. And you see that you got a syntax error, invalid syntax, at line 5, which is this one in here. Again, the arrow points you at the token, so you need to figure out how to fix this round bracket here. And you know that you need to close it with a square bracket, so that should fix the issue. So that's about syntax errors. They are very easy to fix. In the next lecture, I'll explain exceptions. So see you there. Hi again and welcome to this new lecture. In the previous lecture, we talked about errors in general, and I focused on syntax errors, which is one of the 2 types of errors you have in Python. So you have syntax errors and you have exceptions. Now we're going to talk about exceptions in Python. So every other type of error that is not a syntax error is an exception. And often all errors, syntax errors and exceptions, they are referred to as errors. So you're going to hear this all over the place. Now I have a new script here that I created for this lecture. Try to guess what I'm going to get as output when I execute this script. So I have a equals to 1, b equals to character 2, print int 2.5, and print a plus b. So guess what I'm going to get for a moment. Okay, now let me run the script, Python 3, errors.py. File errors.py, line 4, which is the last line. This one, we get a syntax error, invalid syntax. Now this can be very confusing for you now because you're looking at the print a plus b expression, but you don't see any error there. So for a beginner, this can be quite frustrating, but try to look back on the left of the arrow here. So think of the arrow, that the arrow is pointing at the token, and the token has not been written correctly in the script. So in this case, the problem here is that this line here, it has an open bracket, a round bracket, and then it has the int function, and then the int function has its own brackets that is wrapping inside its input. So these are the brackets of the int function, but the print function doesn't have a closing bracket. What I did is that instead of putting a bracket there, I actually wrote another print function. So Python was expecting a closing round bracket, but I typed in a print function. That's why this is saying that this print function is not in the correct position. That's the idea. So always when you see this arrow, first look at this line, but then look before that also. Sorry about this. So always when you see this arrow here, first look at this line here, but also don't forget that the problem might also be before this line. Okay, so that was about the syntax error. I'll explain why I talked about this syntax error here. Let me execute this again. So the syntax error was fixed now, but we still have another error. So the reason I included a syntax error in my code was to show you that Python actually first checks for syntax errors. So basically it parses the code, it looks for syntax errors, it doesn't execute the code yet. So when I executed python3 errors.py in here, the code was not executed, but the interpreter just checks for syntax errors. It doesn't check for exceptions just yet. So first you need to fix the syntax errors, and that's what we did here. We added this bracket and we fixed the syntax errors. Now Python is throwing out an exception. And here is where I executed the code. And see the next line, we have number 2 there, which is coming from the output of this line here. So from line 3, we got the output correctly. So basically, again, Python executes the script from top to bottom if it doesn't find syntax errors. If it finds syntax errors, it doesn't execute anything. So 2 is printed out, and then you get this trace back of the error, which starts there and ends in here. That's the block of the error. Sometimes the errors may have more than one type of error. So in this case, we have only one type of error, which is a type error. But you may have multiple blocks here. However, the most important error that you must focus on is the last line of the error. So the last block of the error. In this case, we have only one block, so we are focused on that. And line 4, which is this one in here. This is the line. Again, the line is printing out, just like in the case of syntax error. And here you have the type of the error here, which is a type error. So what's a type error? A type error means that there is something wrong with one of your object types in your script. And you have the description here, unsupported operand type for plus. So this is trying to say that the plus operator has an unsupported type. So the plus operator, in other words, doesn't support one of the types that you have given to it. So it either the type of variable A or the type of variable B. So it says int and string. So it doesn't specifically say that whether int or string is the object, but it says that you cannot use a plus operator with an integer and a string. And that's logically wrong, because you cannot add a number to some text. That's what Python doesn't understand, and it throws a type error. So exceptions are like logical errors, and you need to use your logic now to fix the error. And you use your logic by carefully inspecting the error, and that's what we did. So what we want to do, we want to fix this. Now it's up to me whether I meant to concatenate these two objects or do a mathematical addition operation. So let's say if I was intending to do an addition between these two numbers, then I would have to convert b to a float or an integer. Save that, execute, and yeah, in this case you don't get any error. You get 2 printed out from the third line and 3.0 from the last line that we have just fixed. However, if my intention was to actually print out the concatenation between these two strings, instead of converting b to a float, I would have to convert a to a string. In this case, I would get the text 1 and 2. 1 and 2. So that would be a string object, not a number. Even though here it shows as a number, it's just how the terminal prints it out. So again, these are errors that occur in runtime, so when the script executes. Syntax errors are parsing errors, so the interpreter tries to understand whether the script is syntactically correct, whether you have followed the Python syntax rules. So you need a bracket, a closing bracket for opening bracket, you need a closing quote after the opening quote, and so on. Now there are also other types of exceptions, not only type error. You may have a name error. Let's say here, instead of printing out that, we print out C. Save, execute. And here is a traceback. Again, 2 was printed out from the third line. And the traceback says line 4 at print C. Name error, name C is not defined. So again, this is not a syntax error because you haven't made any mistakes with the syntax. You have this variable name, which is correct. You have brackets opening around brackets and closing around bracket. So everything is syntactically correct, but this C object, Python doesn't know this. You haven't defined this C variable, so Python doesn't know what to print out. Python is able to print out A because it knows that A refers to the 1 to integer 1, and so it prints out integer 1, but C doesn't have anything, so you get this name error. And whenever you get a name error, you know that this name here has not been defined by you. So to fix this, you may want to define C like that and execute, and you don't get any error. You may also have other types of errors, such as C divided by 0. See what you get. A zero division error, division by 0. That's the description of this error. So division by 0 is not mathematically possible or meaningful. And since Python is based on mathematics, then it throws an error. You need to fix that. You need to remove that expression that divides by 0. And yeah, that's about errors in Python. I hope you understood a great deal of this lecture and the previous lecture as well. So it's relatively easy to fix errors. However, sometimes there are errors that you might have difficulties understanding and fixing them. So later, for example, we're going to work on libraries, and sometimes libraries, they have different kinds of errors. However, nothing to worry about, because there are other things that you can do for an error that you don't understand. And I'll talk about that in the next lecture. So I'll see you there. See you. Great, welcome again to this new video. This is the third video about errors. So we talked about syntax errors, we talked about exceptions, and now we're going to talk about how to fix an error when you don't understand the message. So let's focus on this error. A zero division error. In case you were good in mathematics, you could easily fix this error, so you'll be able to understand that you cannot divide C by you cannot divide a number by 0. So you'd fix this by removing this expression here. However, if you are not that good in mathematics, you may find this difficult to understand. In that case, the fastest way to fix this error is by copying this line here, Ctrl-C. So select it, copy it with Ctrl-C or right-click and copy there, and then go to Google. Just paste it. Now, on Google, this got around 100,000 results, so Python is very popular, and you'll get a solution for almost every problem that you'll get with Python. So before looking at documentation or asking a question somewhere, it's very likely that someone else has had your issue before, and they have asked a question about that, and there is a solution about that as well. And a very, very good question and answer website is stackoverflow.com. And almost always when you search for an error on Google, the first results will be from Stack Overflow. Someone has asked a question with this title. It says, I faced an error when I ran the program using Python. So it's the same exact error as you, like that. How to avoid that error. And it also talks about the desired output. And there are two answers for this question. The answer with this green mark here is the accepted answer, and it has the most upvotes. So 11, and this has 2 downvotes. So -2. Actually, the difference between upvotes and downvotes is in the favor of downvotes. So these are two different answers that you can look at. Usually you want to look at the accepted answer that has the solution. However, in this case, this also has the explanation. It says you cannot divide by 0. This causes Python to raise an error. That's still a good answer, and I think it didn't deserve to have this balance of votes. But this one gives a solution on how to handle an error, and that takes us to another concept, which is handling errors in Python. So let's say you have a program, you have a function that gets 2 input values, and then it divides those 2 input values. However, sometimes the user may pass 0 as a second input. And in that case, if you divide, let's say the first value would be 2 and the second value would be 0, your program would crash. And if you want, you can use exception handling to actually avoid that program from crashing. And you can do that with a try and except statement. Anyway, we'll cover that in the next lectures in this section. So this was about searching for an error on Google, and you can easily find the solution to that. As you see, these are very clear questions. It's a big community, and everyone can vote up and down and can comment. So basically, the answers are very accurate. However, you'll not always find an answer on Google. In that case, it's time to ask your own question. So the first thing is, again, you check if you understand the error and fix it if you understand it. The second thing is you do a search on Google, and if the first 2 fail to solve your problem, then it's time to ask a question. And you can ask a question either inside the course. So you can, while watching a video, you can browse Q&A, which stands for question and answer, and you can do a quick search if you find an existing answer to your question here. And if you cannot find it, then you can ask a question, or you can ask a question on Stack Overflow. You can use this button here, ask question, and I'll be happy to help you here on the course interface Q&A section, or other people can also help you on Stack Overflow. However, something is very important to know. The structure of your question is very important on getting a good answer. Sometimes there are very bad questions, like, let's say, my code is not working, how do I fix this? And that's all. With that very little information, it's very hard to get a good answer. So it's very important to ask a good question, and I'll show you how to ask a good programming question in the next lecture. So that's a very important lecture as well. See you there. Hey, hi again and welcome to yet another lecture. In this lecture I'll show you how to ask a good programming question. As I mentioned in the previous lecture, asking a good programming question is very important to get a good answer. And let me first show you what's a bad programming question. For instance, I'm going to click on Ask Question, and here is the title of the question. A bad programming question would have a very generic title like that. And here is the body of the question where you have to describe your question in detail. Some people, they just say, I got an error when trying to numbers. And I just pause the question. A better question would be to include the error, the code there that you executed, like that. However, that is also not enough because you also need to show the error message. So let me delete this, and a good programming question would be, when we're talking about questions that have an error, questions that talk about an error that you got in your code. So this is your code. A good title would be to include the error message. So that one would be a good fit. If it's a very long message, then you can also choose to include only the name of the error without that. And then a good question would be, hi, I run the following code and expected to get division in the last print domain, but I got an error. Here is my code. So you put the code there, your entire script. Don't worry, if your question is long, it's better to be long than to be incomplete. And here is the error. And here, make sure to include your entire error traceback, including the output as well. So from this line of the command line up to the next line. So this entire thing goes to your question. Just copy it. Don't worry if it's long. Can you help? So that would be a good programming question. Now this is still missing something very important, and that is the highlighting of the code. You need to select the code and click on this icon here. The error as well. And let me pose the question. External links must provide free educational content. Just click on proceed. And here is a question and here is how it looks like on the other end. So this question has 4 good elements that make it a good question. The first element is that the poster is mentioning what he or she expected to get as output from the script that they were running. So it says that I was expecting to get the division in the last print statement, which is this one here, but I got an error. So the first thing is you need to include the expected output. You need to explain what you were expecting, because otherwise, if you don't explain what you were expecting, that the other person who wants to help you doesn't know the goal of your code or of your question, so it doesn't know how to help you to reach to that goal. So expected output is the first thing. The second thing is you need to include your entire code. And make sure that you include your code as text. It's better to use text as rather than screenshots, because text, the person who wants to help you can copy your code and run it on their Python interpreter. But if you include screenshots, they are images, and it's hard for other people to try out your code. If you ask this on Stack Overflow, your question would get closed, because if you ask it using a screenshot rather than the text version of your code, the question would get closed, because there are very strong rules in Stack Overflow to have a high quality question and answer side. So that's the second element. The third element is you need to include your entire screenshot, entire error traceback, sorry. So from the beginning up to the end. That was the third element, and the last element, the fourth element, is you need to highlight your code. Just like that. You see, this is much more visible and easier for others to troubleshoot. So the course interface has that function there that you can highlight your code. On Stack Overflow, you also have that capability. So just go to ask question, you write the code here, and highlight it, and then use this curly brackets. Yeah, that's it. If you ask good questions, the odds are that you're going to get a good answer as well. So I hope this makes sense, and I hope I showed you something that you didn't know, and I'll talk to you later. See you. Hi again, let's have one more lecture about errors in Python, and this particular lecture will be about handling errors. Handling errors can be an advanced concept to digest for now, because you're still going through the basics of Python and you haven't seen any real application yet. But later we will use error handling when we're building real-world applications. So you're going to understand error handling better later on. For now, let's just focus on the syntax and try to understand as much as you can. I'll go and do an example here. Which I mentioned earlier. Let's say we have a function that does division between two given numbers, like that. Return A divided by B. And then you call the function here. Divide 1, 2. In this case, the function will try to divide 1 by 2. And let me print out the output so that we can see it on the terminal. Go to the terminal and execute the script. So you get 0.5. Now that's good. However, if the user enters, let's say, 0 there, like that, execute, and your program will crash, so it will show an error. Now this one here is an example of a longer error message that I mentioned previously in the previous videos, that you might have more than one error in your traceback. So for instance, this says file line 4, this line here. So that line is where Python captured the error at first. So basically Python was trying to execute this line, but it couldn't do it. It didn't manage to do it because this line was trying to get the information from this function. And this function was trying to do this mathematical operation using 0 after the division. So that is not possible, and Python is pointing that out here. So that's the main error in line 2 in this expression. So that's where you should focus. However, when you ask questions, you should include the entire error message in your question, as I mentioned previously. So, back to handling errors now. What I'm trying to say here is that, you know, if you had other functions here and other lines of code that you want to execute, that you want Python to execute, but if the user passed this 0 number here, all the other lines would not be executed, so your program would crash, and you don't want that. And the way to avoid that is by using try and except. So basically you try to capture the exception, to handle the exception, and the way to do that is quite easy. Try, you say try and return AB, so this has to be indented like that. So try is indented because it's under the function definition, and then return is indented because it's under the try expression. Then you have except execute, so this has to be in the same indentation level with try. they are the same block. So except if there is an exception, what you want to do is print out you are dividing by 0 or is meaningless. So let me try this now. And you get 0 division is meaningless and none. Oh, sorry, I meant to do here a return, not print. I explain you why you get none there. And so you got none as an output because what the function did was it tried to do this expression, but it got an error, so it ignores this line, it doesn't execute it, and then it goes to the next line. So this line is executed when this is not executed. And so it printed out 0 division is meaningless, but it also printed out none because when you execute a function that doesn't have a return statement, such as in this case, we had a print statement here, a print function, not a return statement. In that case, if the function is not returning anything, it can have a print function or other function as well. But if it doesn't have a return statement, then it will print out none. So basically, it executes the other procedures, such as the print statement, it prints out the statement, but if it doesn't have a return statement, it prints out none. Anyway, save this now, execute again, and in this case you get only this 0 division is meaningless printed out there. So basically, if you had other lines of code here, like that, those would be executed as well. And that happens by using the try and except block, which makes sure that the code flow continues. So, one other important thing to note is that it is advisable to actually here use the exact name of the error that you want to accept. So, 0 division error. And as you see, this got turned into blue. Which means that this is actually a Python keyword. It's recognized by Python. And in that case, if you execute this, you get the same output actually, like that. Or if you pass a number there that it is possible to get a division from, you'll get that. Sorry about the backslash. I typed that by mistake on my terminal. Execute again, so you get this. And so what I'm trying to say about the 0 division error is that, sometimes you might get other types of errors in your code, other types of exceptions. So let's say you have a name error there, and you are saying that accept all errors. When you don't pass this, you're basically including all types of errors there, and that is a bit dangerous for your code because, you might have problems that you don't notice. And basically you are ignoring that, but you shouldn't. So it should be specific there, explicit, like that. If there are other types of errors, such as a name error, that name error will crash your program, so you know what's going on. And you need to be specific. If we want to handle that error too, then you can add another exception here, except name error for instance. Yeah, that's about handling errors in Python. I hope this makes sense. I hope I explained this well, and yeah, this is about errors. I'll talk to you in the next lectures. See you.